The blood on her pale knuckles had dried to rust by the time Theodora Collier stumbled onto the open road, her face throbbing with pain where her husband's wedding ring had left its mark. Wyoming Territory, 1876, was no place for a woman alone at dusk, but anywhere was better than the prison she'd fled. When she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind, Theodora's first instinct was to hide, but her trembling legs betrayed her, and she sank to her knees in the dirt instead. "Madam." The voice was deep, concerned. A tall figure dismounted, boots kicking up dust as he approached. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" Theodora raised her head slowly, wincing at the pain that shot across her cheekbone. The man before her wore a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, chaps dusted with the day's ride, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded kind eyes. "Not her husband's hunting party, then, I'm." Her voice cracked from thirst and fear. "I need to get to town." The stranger knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance as he assessed her injuries. His eyes lingered on the purple bruise blooming beneath her right eye, extending down her cheekbone like a grotesque flower. "That needs tending," he said softly. Then, after a moment's consideration, "I'm Griffin Adams. My ranch is just over that ridge. I can take you to town tomorrow, but you ought to rest first." Theodora shook her head, panic rising in her chest. "No, I can't stay here." She stopped herself, glancing fearfully over her shoulder at the road that led back to the grand house she'd escaped. Griffin's jaw tightened as understanding dawned. "You're running from someone." It wasn't a question. With careful movements, he offered his canteen. "Drink this. Then we'll talk about where to go." As Theodora sipped the lukewarm water, Griffin surveyed the empty road. "Whoever did this to you," he said, voice hardening like iron in a forge, "you'll never go back there, not while I draw breath." The conviction in his voice made her look up sharply. She'd heard promises before, from her father when he'd arranged her marriage to Edmund, from Edmund himself on their wedding day, from the sheriff who looked the other way because Edmund's money spoke louder than her bruises ever could. "You don't understand," she whispered. "My husband owns half the county. There's nowhere Edmund Hargrove." Griffin's expression darkened further. At her startled nod, he exhaled slowly. "That explains some things. Man's got a reputation, though most folks pretend not to notice." He stood, offering his hand. "Come on. I know somewhere safe, and it ain't my ranch. Too obvious." Theodora hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his calloused palm. As he helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with practiced ease, she felt the warmth of his chest against her back, a foreign sensation after months of flinching from every touch. "Thank you," she murmured as they rode away from the setting sun, away from the life she was leaving behind. Griffin's only response was to nudge his horse into a canter, his arm steady around her waist as they disappeared into the gathering dusk. They rode for what seemed like hours, following trails only Griffin seemed to know. The pain in Theodora's face had settled to a dull throb, but every jolt of the horse's gait sent fresh waves of discomfort through her body. She hadn't realized how many bruises Edmund had left until she'd started running. "Not much further," Griffin said close to her ear as they descended into a narrow valley. "My friend Martha runs a way station about a mile ahead. She's good at keeping secrets." Theodora nodded, too exhausted to speak. When they finally approached a modest cabin nestled against the hillside, lights glowing from within, she nearly wept with relief. A stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun greeted them at the door, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern when she saw Theodora's face. "Martha, this is." Griffin paused, realizing he'd never asked her name. "Theodora," she supplied quietly. "Theodora Collier?" "Hargrove's wife." Martha's eyebrows shot up, but to her credit, she simply stepped aside. "Get in here before someone sees you. That man's had riders out since sundown." The interior of the cabin was warm and smelled of bread and coffee. Martha bustled about, setting water to boil and gathering clean cloths while Griffin helped Theodora to a chair by the hearth. "I've got a back room where travelers sometimes stay," Martha explained as she gently cleaned the cut on Theodora's cheekbone. No windows, just the one door, safe as houses. Safer than some, Griffin muttered, removing his hat and running a hand through his sandy hair. Martha shot him a look. You staying too? Just long enough to make sure she's settled. I need to head back, make myself visible. If Hargrove's men are looking, I don't want them thinking I've got anything to hide. Theodora caught his wrist as he moved to leave. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if, don't thank me yet, he interrupted gently. We've got a long way to go before you're truly free of him. His eyes, the color of faded denim, held hers. But I meant what I said, you're never going back there. After Griffin left, Martha helped Theodora bathe and change into a simple cotton nightdress. The older woman's efficiency was tempered with kindness as she catalogued Theodora's injuries: the bruised cheekbone, the fingerprint marks on her upper arms, the older, yellowing bruises along her ribs. How long has he been hurting you? Martha asked as she applied witch hazel to the worst of the bruises. Theodora stared into the fire. It started 6 months after we married. Small things at first, grabbing too hard, pushing me against a wall when he was angry. It got worse after I lost the baby. Martha's hands stilled. I'm sorry, child. He said it was my fault, that I wasn't strong enough to carry his son. Theodora's voice was hollow. Maybe he was right. Nonsense, Martha said firmly. Some babes just aren't meant for this world. Doesn't mean the mother failed. She corked the witch hazel bottle. Now you need sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next. But sleep proved elusive. Every time Theodora closed her eyes, she saw Edmund's face contorted with rage, felt his hands around her throat. She'd endured 3 years of marriage to him, watching her spirited nature slowly crushed beneath his cruel dominance. Tonight had been different only in degree. He'd struck her face for the first time, breaking his own rule about leaving visible marks. She hadn't planned to run. But when he'd stormed out to his study, leaving her crumpled on their bedroom floor, something had finally snapped inside her. She'd grabbed the emergency money she'd been secretly saving, stuffed a few essentials into a small bag, and fled through the servants' entrance while the housekeeper was delivering Edmund's evening whiskey. Now, lying in Martha's spare room, Theodora wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Edmund would never stop looking for her. He'd made that clear from the beginning of their marriage. She was his, and he'd rather see her dead than free. The thought of Griffin Adams's steady presence offered small comfort. She knew better than to trust a stranger's kindness. Life had taught her that lesson repeatedly, but something in his eyes had made her believe, just for a moment, that she might actually escape. Dawn was breaking when Martha knocked softly on her door. Theodora had barely slept, but she rose quickly, dressing in the simple clothes Martha had provided. Griffin's back, Martha said, her expression unreadable. And he's not alone. Panic seized Theodora's chest. Edmund? No, child, the sheriff. In the main room, Griffin stood beside a tall, weathered man wearing a sheriff's badge. Theodora froze in the doorway, heart hammering. The last time she'd approached the local sheriff about Edmund's treatment, her husband had made her pay dearly for the embarrassment. This is Sheriff Tanner, Griffin said, his voice carefully neutral. He's from Cottonwood Falls, not Riverspend. The distinction was significant. Riverspend was Edmund's territory, but Cottonwood Falls lay just across the county line, beyond his immediate influence. Sheriff Tanner removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, then corrected himself when he saw her flinch. Miss Collier, I understand you're in a difficult situation. Theodora's gaze flicked to Griffin, who nodded encouragingly. My husband will be looking for me, she said softly, and he won't stop until he finds me. That's why I'm here, Tanner said. Griffin tells me you have reason to fear for your life. I can offer protection, but only if you're willing to make an official statement. The room seemed to spin. A statement, you mean, against Edmund? Yes, madam, assault is a crime even when it's a husband against his wife. Theodora gave a bitter laugh. Not in my experience, Sheriff. Things are different in Cottonwood Falls, Griffin interjected. Sheriff Tanner's sister was killed by her husband 10 years back. He takes these matters seriously. Tanner's weathered face tightened. I do. And while I can't promise justice is guaranteed, I can promise you'll get a fair hearing. Martha placed a cup of coffee in Theodora's hands. You don't have to decide right now, but staying hidden isn't a long-term solution. Theodora sipped the hot liquid, letting it burn away some of her fear. What would happen if I made a statement? I'd file charges, Tanner explained. Hargrove would be brought in for questioning. There'd be a trial if the evidence warrants it. And if he's not convicted, the question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Griffin stepped forward. Then we try something else, but one step at a time. Theodora studied him, the earnest set of his jaw, the protective stance he'd unconsciously adopted. He had no reason to help her, a stranger, yet here he was, risking Edmund's wrath. All right, she said finally. I'll make a statement, but first, I need to understand what I'm facing. If Edmund finds me before the law can protect me. He won't, Griffin said with such certainty that she almost believed him. Sheriff Tanner cleared his throat. I suggest we move you to Cottonwood Falls today. You'll be safer there under my direct protection. I'll take her, Griffin volunteered immediately. Martha snorted. You think Hargrove's men aren't watching your every move by now? The moment you ride out with a woman, they'll be on your tail. She's right, Tanner agreed. We need a diversion and a different route. The three of them discussed options while Theodora listened, trying to process the reality of her situation. She'd never imagined having allies against Edmund. The sensation was as foreign as it was fragile. She didn't dare trust it completely. I have an idea, she said suddenly, interrupting their planning. Edmund's men will be looking for a woman traveling alone or with a single man. They won't suspect a family. Griffin raised an eyebrow. You suggesting we disguise ourselves as husband and wife, with children, Theodora added. Martha, do you know any families heading to Cottonwood Falls soon? People we could travel with? Martha's face lit up. The Hendersons are leaving tomorrow with their wagon, taking their 3 young'uns to visit relatives. They'd take you along, I'm certain. Sheriff Tanner nodded approvingly. Good thinking. You two could pose as relatives joining them for the journey. It's less conspicuous than traveling alone. Griffin looked at Theodora with newfound respect. Edmund underestimated you. Most people do, she replied softly. The plan came together quickly. Martha sent word to the Hendersons, who agreed to the arrangement without hesitation. Sheriff Tanner would ride ahead to prepare for their arrival in Cottonwood Falls, while Griffin would join the wagon train as Theodora's husband, providing an extra gun for protection. That afternoon, Griffin took Theodora to a secluded spot behind Martha's cabin to teach her how to handle a small revolver. His hands were patient as he showed her how to load and aim. I pray you never need to use this, he said as she practiced her stance. But if it comes to it, don't hesitate. Aim for the center of the body, both hands on the grip to steady yourself. Theodora nodded, the weight of the weapon uncomfortable but reassuring. I never thought I'd be learning to shoot. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Griffin adjusted her elbow slightly. Try again. She squeezed the trigger, the crack of the shot echoing across the valley. This time the tin can 20 paces away jumped and fell. Good, Griffin said, the approval in his voice warming her. You're a natural. My father wanted sons, Theodora found herself explaining. He taught me to ride and fish before my mother made him stop, said it wasn't ladylike. Griffin leaned against a tree trunk, watching her reload the way he'd shown her. And what did you think about that? I loved those lessons. They were the only times he seemed truly proud of me. She raised the gun again, sighted down the barrel. Until he decided I was better used as a bargaining chip with Edmund. The second shot hit its mark cleanly. Griffin whistled low. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Miss Collier. For the first time since she'd fled her home, Theodora felt the corner of her mouth lift in something approaching a smile. That evening, Martha prepared a hearty stew, and the 3 of them sat around her table discussing final arrangements for the journey. Theodora would need to look the part of Griffin's wife, which meant sharing close quarters in the wagon. I understand if that makes you uncomfortable, Griffin said, his expression serious. We can find another arrangement if needed. Theodora considered him this man who'd appeared on the road like an answer to prayers she hadn't dared voice. I trust you, she said simply, surprising herself with the truth of it. Martha huffed. Well, you'll need to look the part too. Folks need to believe you're a married couple. She disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a small wooden box. These were my Henrys, wedding bands, plain enough not to draw attention. Griffin accepted the simple gold band with reverence. We'll return them, Martha. See that you do, she replied gruffly, but her eyes were kind. That night, sleep came easier to Theodora, despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone in her fight. The thought carried her into dreams that, while not entirely peaceful, were free of Edmund's looming presence. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Martha packed provisions while Griffin saddled his horse and secured a second mount for Theodora. They would meet the Henderson family at the crossroads, joining their wagon for the 2-day journey to Cottonwood Falls. As they prepared to leave, Martha pressed a small package into Theodora's hands. Herbs, she explained, for pain and healing, and this, she slipped something else into Theodora's pocket. A good luck charm belonged to my mother. Theodora hugged the older woman fiercely. Thank you for everything. Martha patted her back awkwardly. Off with you now. And mind you take care of each other. The ride to the crossroads was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Griffin kept them to less traveled paths, winding through stands of pine and rocky outcroppings that provided cover. There they are, he said eventually, pointing to a wagon visible in the distance. Remember, we're Griffin and Theodora Adams, heading to visit your sister in Cottonwood Falls after losing our farm to drought. Theodora nodded, slipping Martha's ring onto her finger. The weight of it was strange but not unpleasant. How did we meet? She asked, realizing they needed more details for their charade. Griffin considered this as they approached the wagon. Church social. You were serving lemonade. I spilled mine all over your best Sunday dress. And I married you anyway. Theodora raised an eyebrow, finding it surprisingly easy to slip into this fictional past. I'm very charming when I set my mind to it, Griffin replied with a wink that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. The Henderson family welcomed them warmly. Mary Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes, immediately took Theodora under her wing, while her husband Thomas helped Griffin secure their horses to the back of the wagon. Their 3 children, Emma, Jacob, and little Susie, regarded the newcomers with shy curiosity. That's quite a bruise, Mary said quietly when the men were out of earshot. Your man do that to you? Theodora tensed, but Mary's expression held no judgment, only concern. No, she answered truthfully. Griffin would never hurt me. This was someone else. Mary nodded, understanding more than Theodora had said. Well, you're safe with us. Thomas may look soft around the middle, but he's handy with that rifle, and your Griffin seems capable enough. He's not really mine, Theodora found herself saying, then flushed at her own transparency. Mary smiled knowingly. We'll see about that. Now come help me with the children's lunch. We've got a long road ahead. The wagon train set out at midday, their pace deliberately unhurried to avoid attracting attention. Griffin rode alongside on horseback for stretches, scouting ahead, and then returning to walk beside the wagon where Theodora sat with Mary and the children. By unspoken agreement, they avoided main roads, adding time to their journey but decreasing the chances of encountering Edmund's men. When they stopped for the night, Thomas and Griffin set up a camp nestled in a grove of cottonwoods by a small creek. After a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, the children were tucked into the wagon while the adults sat around the campfire. Thomas shared stories of his younger days as a fur trapper, his animated gestures making even the most harrowing tales seem like grand adventures. What about you two? He asked eventually. How long have you been married? Griffin and Theodora exchanged a glance. 3 years, Griffin answered smoothly, reaching for her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Though sometimes it feels like I've known her my whole life. The sincerity in his voice made Theodora wonder if perhaps he wasn't entirely acting. But that was foolish, he was simply playing his part well. When it came time to sleep, Thomas and Mary retreated to the wagon with their children, leaving Griffin and Theodora the small tent they'd helped erect. "I can sleep outside," Griffin offered immediately. "Give you some privacy." Theodora glanced at the dark woods surrounding them. "No, it's fine. The tent is big enough for both of us." She paused, then added, "I'd feel safer with you nearby." Inside the canvas shelter, Griffin laid out their bedrolls with a careful space between them. As they settled in for the night, the sounds of the wilderness surrounded them, crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. "You think they're looking for me?" Theodora whispered into the darkness. Griffin was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he finally answered, "but they're looking on the main roads in the towns, not out here with a family wagon." She turned toward him, able to make out his profile in the dim moonlight filtering through the canvas. "Why are you doing this, helping me? You don't even know me." He shifted to face her, their eyes meeting across the small space between them. "My sister," he said softly. "She was married to a man like Edmund, controlled her, isolated her, beat her when she displeased him." Theodora's heart constricted. "What happened to her? She ran like you." "But she had no one to help her. He found her 3 days later." Griffin's voice tightened. "By the time I got there, it was too late." "I'm so sorry," Theodora whispered, reaching across the space to touch his arm. Griffin covered her hand with his. "That's why I stopped when I saw you on that road. I couldn't save Sarah, but maybe I can help you." The honesty in his voice wrapped around Theodora like a blanket. They lay there in comfortable silence until sleep finally claimed them both, their hands still connected across the divide. The second day of travel passed without incident. They crossed into Cottonwood Falls County by mid-afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from rolling prairie to more rugged terrain. Sheriff Tanner met them at a predetermined spot 5 miles outside of town, his presence a visible relief to Griffin. "No sign of Hargrove or his men," Tanner reported, "but word travels fast. It's only a matter of time before he expands his search this way." They parted from the Hendersons with heartfelt thanks, Mary pressing a small packet of biscuits into Theodora's hands. "For the road ahead," she said with a meaningful look. "Whatever that might be." Sheriff Tanner led them to a small cabin on the outskirts of town. "My deputy's sister owns it," he explained. "She's away visiting family back east. You'll be safe here while we sort things out." The cabin was simple but clean, with 2 small bedrooms, a common area with a stone fireplace, and a basic kitchen. Tanner showed them where supplies were stored and promised to return the next morning to take Theodora's statement. When they were alone, an awkward silence fell between them. The pretense of marriage no longer necessary, they suddenly seemed unsure how to relate to each other. "I'll take this room," Griffin said, indicating the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." Theodora nodded, exhaustion from the journey catching up with her. But as she prepared for bed in the larger room, the reality of what lay ahead pressed down on her. Making an official statement against Edmund meant confronting everything she'd endured, every humiliation and pain she'd hidden for years. Unable to sleep, she returned to the main room to find Griffin stoking the fire, his expression distant. "I'm afraid," she admitted, sitting in a chair opposite him. "Not just of Edmund finding me, but of not being believed, of having to return to him." Griffin looked up, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "I won't let that happen." "You can't promise that." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I can promise I'll stand by you, whatever comes next." Theodora studied him, this man who'd become her unlikely champion. In the short time she'd known him, he'd shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. "Why does it matter so much to you? Beyond what happened to your sister?" Griffin poked at the fire, sparks rising with each prod. "When I found you on that road," he said slowly, "you were hurt, afraid, but there was something in your eyes, determination, courage. You weren't broken." He met her gaze. "Some people endure terrible things and lose themselves. Others find strength they never knew they had." "And which am I?" she asked softly. "The strongest person I've ever met," he replied without hesitation. Something warm unfurled in Theodora's chest, a feeling so foreign she almost didn't recognize it. Hope, perhaps. Or the beginnings of something even more profound. The next morning, Sheriff Tanner arrived with his deputy, a serious young man named Wilson. Theodora sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly together as she recounted 3 years of abuse at Edmund's hands. Griffin remained beside her throughout, his steady presence anchoring her when memories threatened to overwhelm. "He was always careful," she explained, "never leaving marks where people could see until that last night." Tanner's expression remained professional, but his eyes betrayed his anger as he documented each incident. When she finished, the cabin was silent save for the scratching of his pencil. "This is enough to bring charges," he said finally. "But Hargrove has money and influence. It won't be easy." "What happens now?" Griffin asked. "I file these papers with the circuit judge. He'll issue a warrant for questioning at minimum, then we wait for Hargrove to be brought in." Tanner looked directly at Theodora. "You should know, he's offering a substantial reward for information on your whereabouts. Claims you're unwell and ran off during an episode." Fury flashed across Griffin's face, but Theodora merely nodded. "I expected as much. He'll try to paint me as hysterical or mad." "Which is why we need witnesses," Tanner said. "Anyone who might have seen the abuse or its aftermath. Servants, maybe." Theodora considered this. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, she tended to me several times, and the stable boy, Jamie, he saw Edmund drag me across the yard once." "Good. I'll send Wilson to find them." Tanner stood, gathering his papers. "In the meantime, stay hidden, both of you." After he left, Griffin began pacing the small cabin. "We should have backup plans. If the legal route fails, then what?" Theodora interrupted. "I keep running forever. Hide in cabins and pretend to be someone else for the rest of my life." Her voice broke. "I'm so tired of being afraid, Griffin." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I know, and you shouldn't have to live that way. No one should." His grip tightened. "But if it comes to it, I know places. People who could help you start fresh, far from here." The tenderness in his touch, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, they reached something long dormant inside her. Before she could question the impulse, Theodora leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Griffin froze for a heartbeat before responding, his kiss gentle, almost reverent. When they parted, his eyes searched hers, a question in their depths. "I shouldn't have," she began, uncertainty flooding her. "No," he interrupted softly. "Don't apologize, not for that." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, careful to avoid her bruised cheekbone. "But I need you to be sure about what you want. The timing is terrible," she finished with a small laugh. "I know I'm not thinking clearly. You've been so kind, and I'm grateful. This isn't gratitude," Griffin said firmly. "At least not on my side." He stood, creating distance between them. "When I look at you, I don't see someone to rescue. I see someone brave enough to rescue herself." The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Sheriff Tanner visited regularly with updates. The circuit judge had issued a warrant. Edmund was being formally questioned. Witnesses were being interviewed. But the legal wheels turned slowly, and Edmund's money ensured numerous delays. Griffin and Theodora remained in the cabin, venturing out only at dusk for brief walks to prevent cabin fever. During those quiet evenings, they spoke of their lives before they'd met. Griffin's years running his modest ranch, Theodora's childhood in Kansas before her father's financial troubles had led to her arranged marriage. They were careful with each other after that impulsive kiss, maintaining a respectful distance even as the connection between them deepened. Griffin taught her more about handling firearms and basic self-defense, while Theodora shared her love of literature, reading aloud from the few books in the cabin during the long evenings. A week into their seclusion, Sheriff Tanner arrived with news that sent Theodora's heart racing. "Hargrove knows you're in Cottonwood Falls," he said without preamble. "One of his men was spotted asking questions in town yesterday." Griffin immediately moved to the window, checking that the shutters were secure. "How did they find us? Could be coincidence." "They've been searching surrounding towns systematically." Tanner removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But I'm not taking chances. We're moving you tonight." "Where?" Theodora asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My sister's place north of here. Isolated, defensible." "Hargrove wouldn't think to look there." Griffin nodded grimly. "When do we leave?" "After midnight. Pack only what you need." Tanner hesitated. "There's something else. Judge Hollister is reviewing your case tomorrow if he decides there's insufficient evidence." "Edmund walks free," Theodora finished, her stomach clenching. "Not free exactly, but the criminal charges might be dropped." Tanner looked apologetic. "Civil matters like divorce proceedings would still be possible." Theodora laughed bitterly. "Edmund would never agree to a divorce. In his mind, I belong to him." "Then we'll find another way," Griffin said, his voice hard with resolve. That night, as they packed their meager belongings by lamplight, the weight of their situation pressed heavily upon them. If the legal system failed her, Theodora's options narrowed dramatically. She could keep running, but for how long? Edmund had resources she couldn't match, connections across multiple territories. "I won't go back to him," she said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Even if it means I have to disappear completely," Griffin paused in his packing. "It won't come to that. You don't know that." She set down the shirt she was folding. "I need you to understand, if he finds me if I'm cornered, I won't let him take me alive." The starkness of her declaration hung in the air between them. Griffin crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her face gently between his hands. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "As long as I'm breathing, he will not touch you. We will find a way through this." The certainty in his eyes made her want to believe him. Standing there in the dim cabin, his hands warm against her skin, Theodora made a decision. If these were to be her last moments of freedom, she would not spend them in fear. She rose on her toes and kissed him again. No hesitation this time. Griffin responded immediately, his arms encircling her with protective tenderness that quickly deepened into something more urgent. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I've been falling in love with you since I found you on that road," he confessed. "But I need you to know I want you safe more than I want you with me. If that means you need to go somewhere I can't follow, no," she interrupted fiercely. "We face this together, whatever comes next." Their departure that night was swift and silent. Sheriff Tanner led them through back trails to a remote homestead nestled in a forested valley. His sister Eliza, a stern-faced widow with kind eyes, welcomed them without questions. "Upstairs room is ready," she told Tanner. "No one will find them here." True to her word, the isolated cabin proved a secure haven. Days passed with no sign of Edmund or his men, though tension remained high. Each morning, Tanner or his deputy would ride out to provide updates on the legal proceedings. Judge Hollister had reviewed Theodora's case, and to everyone's surprise, ordered Edmund to stand trial for assault. The stable boy's testimony had proven particularly damning. He'd witnessed Edmund striking Theodora multiple times, and had kept a hidden record of dates and injuries. Hope began to cautiously bloom. Perhaps justice was possible after all. Griffin and Theodora settled into a new routine at Eliza's homestead. During the day, they helped with chores, chopping wood, tending the small garden, repairing fences. At night, they shared the upstairs bedroom, their relationship evolving from protective friendship to something deeper, more profound. In Griffin's arms, Theodora rediscovered parts of herself she thought Edmund had destroyed forever: her capacity for joy, for pleasure untainted by fear, for trust that ran bone deep. Each tender touch healed another fragment of her wounded spirit. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted one night, her head pillowed on his chest. Safe, cherished. Griffin's fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine. You deserve nothing less. Their peaceful interlude was shattered 2 weeks later when Wilson arrived at dawn, his horse lathered from a hard ride. Edmund escaped custody, he announced, accepting the water Eliza thrust into his hands. Bribed a guard. Tanner thinks he's headed this way. Griffin was immediately alert. How? No one knows we're here. Wilson shook his head grimly. Hargrove caught one of our informants. Man talked before. He didn't finish the sentence. Theodora felt ice spreading through her veins. He's coming for me. Not if we leave now, Griffin insisted. There's a train station 30 miles north. We could be halfway to Denver by nightfall. But Wilson was already shaking his head. Roads are watched. He's got men at every crossing, every station within 50 miles. Then we fight, Griffin said, his expression hardening. This ends here. Eliza, who had been silently listening, spoke up. There's a root cellar beneath the barn, hidden entrance stocked with supplies. You two hide there. I'll deal with Hargrove if he comes. Theodora looked at the older woman with growing respect. We can't ask you to take that risk. Eliza snorted. You're not asking, I'm telling. Besides, she added with grim humor, I've been itching to use my late husband's shotgun on something more deserving than coyotes. They spent the day preparing. Wilson rode back to alert Tanner, while Griffin and Theodora helped Eliza fortify the homestead as best they could. The root cellar was indeed well concealed, accessible only through a trapdoor hidden beneath hay bales in the barn's back stall. As dusk approached, the distant sound of hoofbeats froze them all in place. Get to the cellar, Eliza ordered, already reaching for her shotgun. I'll handle this. Griffin hesitated. I should stay, help you. And confirm they're on the right track. No, go, protect her. Eliza's expression softened momentarily. My brother will be here soon with reinforcements. We just need to buy time. With reluctance, Griffin led Theodora to the barn. As they concealed themselves in the root cellar, the sound of horses entering the yard filtered through the wooden ceiling. Edmund Hargrove, Eliza's voice carried faintly to them. What brings you to my property at this hour? I'm looking for my wife, Edmund's voice replied, the familiar cold tone sending shivers down Theodora's spine. I have reason to believe she's in the area. No women here except me, Eliza responded evenly. And I haven't been anyone's wife since Joshua passed. Footsteps moved across the wooden porch. Search the house, Edmund ordered someone, and the outbuildings. Theodora gripped Griffin's hand tightly as boots thudded above them. Men entered the barn, moving hay, opening stall doors. A particularly heavy tread paused directly over the trapdoor. Nothing here, Mr. Hargrove, a voice called eventually. Just horses and feed. Check again, Edmund snapped. She's here somewhere, I can feel it. Griffin silently drew his revolver, positioning himself between Theodora and the trapdoor. They waited, barely breathing, as the search continued. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the tense silence. Then another. That's far enough, Hargrove, Sheriff Tanner's voice rang out. You're under arrest for escaping custody and assaulting an officer of the law. What followed was chaos, shouting, more gunfire, the sound of running feet and horses whinnying in panic. Griffin and Theodora remained frozen in their hiding place, unable to see what was happening but all too aware of the violence unfolding above them. After what seemed like an eternity, silence fell. Then a familiar voice called out, Griffin, Theodora, it's over, you can come out. They emerged cautiously from the root cellar to find Tanner standing in the barn doorway, a bloody bandage wrapped around his upper arm. Behind him, the yard was littered with evidence of the confrontation: upturned crates, scattered hay, a broken lantern. Edmund. Theodora asked, her voice barely audible. Wounded but alive, Tanner replied. As are two of his men, they're being transported back to town under heavy guard. Relief made Theodora's knees buckle. Griffin caught her easily, supporting her weight as they followed Tanner outside. Eliza sat on the porch steps, her shotgun across her knees, looking grimly satisfied. "You missed quite a show," she told them. "Your husband didn't much appreciate finding himself at the wrong end of my barrel." "He's not her husband anymore," Griffin said firmly. "Not in any way that matters." Tanner nodded in agreement. "The judge has already indicated he'll grant an annulment once the criminal trial concludes. Given tonight's events, I'd say Hargrove's chances of walking free are pretty much non-existent." For the first time in years, Theodora felt the heavy chains of her marriage truly beginning to loosen. "It's really over, nearly," Tanner confirmed. "There'll be a trial, testimony, but you won't face it alone." In the weeks that followed, justice moved with surprising swiftness. Edmund's escape attempt had destroyed whatever sympathy the local authorities might have had for his position. Witnesses came forward, emboldened by his fall from power, sharing stories of his cruelty that extended well beyond his treatment of Theodora. The trial was difficult but cathartic. Seated in the crowded courthouse, Griffin beside her, Theodora finally spoke her truth publicly. Edmund glared from the defendant's table, his handsome face twisted with hatred, but he could no longer touch her. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Theodora wept, years of fear and pain releasing in those cleansing tears. Griffin held her through it, his own eyes suspiciously bright. The annulment was granted the following week, formally severing the legal bonds that had held her captive for so long. As they left the courthouse, Theodora Collier once more in name and spirit, Griffin took her hands in his. "What will you do now?" he asked. "You're free to go anywhere, be anyone you choose." She looked up at him, this man who had found her broken on a dusty road and helped her piece herself back together. "I choose to be with you," she said simply, "if you'll have me." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I was hoping you'd say that." They were married that autumn, a small ceremony in Sheriff Tanner's garden with Martha and Eliza arguing good-naturedly over who had played the larger role in bringing them together. The Hendersons brought their children, who scattered flower petals with enthusiastic abandon. Griffin's ranch became their home, the modest house transformed by Theodora's presence into a place of warmth and laughter. At night, when memories sometimes still haunted her dreams, she would wake to find him there, solid and real, his love a constant that slowly healed her deepest wounds. 2 years later, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, their infant daughter sleeping peacefully in Theodora's arms, Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still think we should have named her Martha Eliza," Griffin laughed. "And subjected our poor child to a lifetime of being called Marteliza. I think Sarah suits her better." Theodora smiled down at their daughter, named for the sister Griffin couldn't save. Life had come full circle in the most unexpected ways. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "When you found me on the road." Griffin was quiet for a moment, his hand covering hers where it rested on their daughter's blanket. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I'd taken a different trail that day, or if you'd hidden when you heard my horse." "I almost did," Theodora confessed. "Hide, I mean, but I was too tired to run anymore. Thank God for that." Griffin's voice was fervent. "When I saw you there with that bruise on your face but still standing, I knew you were someone extraordinary." Theodora turned to look at him, this man who had become her partner, her protector, her home. "We saved each other," she said softly. As the last rays of sunlight gilded their small family in golden warmth, Theodora reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a frightened woman fleeing an abusive husband to someone who had rediscovered her own strength and worth. The bruises had long since faded, but the courage she'd found that day remained, a foundation for the life she and Griffin had built together. In the distance, a lone rider approached their property. Theodora tensed momentarily, old fears never entirely forgotten, but Griffin squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's just Wilson," he said, recognizing the deputy's distinctive silhouette. "Probably bringing news about that land deal." Wilson dismounted at their gate, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Evening, folks. Sorry to disturb your family time." "Not at all," Griffin replied, rising to shake the man's hand. "What brings you out this way?" "Thought you'd want to know," Wilson said, nodding respectfully to Theodora. "Edmund Hargrove died yesterday in prison. Fever took him." The news washed over Theodora like a wave, not joy, not grief, but a profound sense of closure. The man who had once dominated her life was gone, his power over her memories diminishing with each passing day. "Thank you for telling us," she said quietly. After Wilson departed, declining their offer of dinner with evident respect for their need to process the news privately, Griffin settled beside Theodora again. Sarah stirred in her sleep, tiny fingers curling around her mother's thumb. "Are you all right?" Griffin asked gently. Theodora considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "I feel free, truly free for the first time." She looked up at him, this man who had promised she would never go back there and had kept that promise against all odds. "I love you, Griffin Adams." "And I love you, Theodora Adams." He gathered his family close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Now and always. In the years that followed, their family grew. A son joined their daughter, then another daughter. Their ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Theodora started a small school for neighboring children, discovering a talent for teaching she'd never been allowed to explore. They never forgot the darkness they had overcome, but neither did they let it define them. Instead, they built a life filled with the light of love freely given and received, each day a testament to the courage that had brought them together on that fateful road where she fled with a bruised face, and he promised she would never go back there. And she never did.